podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello, it's Martin here, and welcome to another episode of On This Week, when we take a meandering look through the events that took place on this week in the history of Sunderland AFC. And as regular listeners will know, I've been away for a few weeks, so it's good to be back. And I have to say, I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to you three bang on, especially listening to Rob Mason sort you out and put you in order. And I can confirm that the flying distance from Singapore to Sydney is now officially 3 episodes of On This Week. So that got me back on the short leg of the flight back to Australia. So that was very good. So I can, if anyone's taking a long haul flight or going for a long run or a long walk on this day, or on this week rather, can certainly get you there. So as usual for this episode, we've got 3 fine chaps here who are brimming with Sunderland knowledge, some anecdotes and 1 or 2 one-liners as we dive into events that took place over the years between the 28th of July and the 3rd of August. And first up is the man who did a sterling job, sat in my seat for the last few weeks, Chris Wynn.
Hello, mate. Yes, I'm so glad you're back. So glad you're back. I was almost in tears this morning thinking, I don't have to know everything about everything. I just have to focus on a couple of things. But in fact, no, mate, I didn't realise that the flight from Singapore to Sydney took 24 hours. Because that'll be about 3 episodes, isn't it?
No, there was a holding pattern at some point. Yeah, it was
right.
Awesome.
Okay.
It all adds up. Yeah, well, it helps us get to sleep. So that's.
Oh
no, I'm only.
Oh, he's back. It took him 2 minutes. Took him 2 minutes to get in through.
I thought I'd get in early before when you two said it. Also this week, as usual, Andrew Smithson. How are you, Andrew?
Hello, Martin. I was gonna say welcome back, but I'm not so sure now. Chris did a brilliant job whilst you were off, as you know. But it is nice for all 4 of us to be back doing this again. Looking forward to it.
After every episode, trying to get through it and know a lot, I was knackered by the end of every episode.
Yeah.
Needed a nap after each one, I think.
That's right. And the man who provides the one-liners to this arrangement is Kelvin Beagrie. How are you, Kelvin?
Morning. Nice to have you back, Martin.
Thank you very much. No, I think it's all worked, but it just shows nobody's indispensable. It's the same as a football team, isn't it? You just crack on without somebody, so it's all good. But it's really interesting. Sorry, go on, man.
I was just going to say the king is dead. Long live the king.
That's exactly right.
I feel like Thomas Hauser going back on the bench here.
That was always one of my favourite headlines. That was a German sub sinks Swindon.
With a torpedo of a shot.
And what's interesting when as Chris said, we do a little bit of work before these podcasts, and we've had a few months of pre-season where nothing much is going on, but now we're getting into the real action. And I went through a whole week's worth of pre-season friendlies today to see if I can find a random trial list or somebody to talk about. So there's all sorts of stuff going on now, and you've got players starting to come in and sign, games starting to happen. And given that we've been clocking up 2.5 hours of crack about things that haven't really happened so far, who knows where we're going to get to with the real action starting. So we'll get on with no further ado. And at the end of last week's episode, Andrew, I think, as is usual, you left the listeners with a few clues that gave a strong hint at somebody who will be at least mentioned in today's podcast.
Correct, yeah. It was a player that had their testimonial, Martin, during this week. I didn't want to give too many details away because I thought that would give the game up a bit. What I did say was this was a much-loved character who started 375 games for us, scored 27 goals, Middle name, Anthony. And his son was on our books for a while. And no doubt you were shouting this out on a plane, thousands of miles up in the air, and your passengers looking at you thinking, why is this bloke shouting Kevin Ball at the top of his voice?
Ooh, Bally. That was the
Yeah.
reverberating around the cabin. Yeah, absolutely. So Kevin Ball, yeah, obviously his testimonial against Sampdoria. And that was, what date was that? That was that the 31st, I think, of July, wasn't it? That was game 9. And yeah, he left the club not that long afterwards. I think it was the December he went to Fulham. So that was well timed for his testimonial. But we'll start on the 28th of July, and we'll just run through a few little bits and pieces that happened before we get stuck into the real action. So 28th of July 1979, and we played a pre-season friendly in Switzerland, 1-1 draw. Gary Rowell was sent off. 1983, Pop Robson, who we've spoken about a few times on these pods, but he's signed for the third time, coming in from Chelsea as a player coach on a free. 1988, Keith Burchin, who again we kind of mentioned a couple of times in those sort of sliding door moments with Eric Gates, and he was the preferred partner for Marco when Dennis Smith signed Marco. But Keith Burchin got injured at Fulham, didn't really feature that much in our third division championship season, and this is obviously during the summer. He signed for Walsall for £30,000. But he actually scored the first and last goals of our third division season. But he also played the next season for Walsall in what was probably one of the worst matches I've ever been to at Roker Park. We played Walsall. It was probably the February, I reckon, from memory, or early March. And Walsall were down the bottom of the league, and we thought this was a great chance to get 3 points, and we still had playoff aspirations. I think a lad called Stuart Rimmer scored a hat-trick, but Burchin played that game, and yeah, he obviously enjoyed his return to Roker Park that season. And we talked about testimonials earlier on. In 1993, so 6 years before Kevin Ball's testimonial.
Just quickly, Martin, just bringing it back to that, Burchin came off after half an hour in that game. I was stood I stood next to the away dugout that game in the paddocks, looking towards the Roker end. And yeah, he got injured early on and came off, but his return would have been pretty sweet, I think, because he was a good player. Just having a quick look as well. Tony Cullen's debut.
Oh, was it?
It was. Came off the bench. It looks like just early in the second half or half time for Ruben Agbola.
Yeah, there you go. I wonder if it was an injury.
Crap game there. Crap game.
Look at this, Martin. Now that Chris isn't in the hosting chair, he's just around, chipping in all these bits of extra info.
You're one of only 14,000. Crap attendance, crap day, crap results. Leave it there.
Made me dad with it. But yeah, going back to 6 years before Kevin Ball's testimonial was Gary Bennett's testimonial, which is the infamous game against Rangers, which it was only 21,000 there, which is quite surprising when you think of the atmosphere that night. But yeah, it was a game that Rangers won 3-1, but it's remembered for all the stuff off the field, really, rather than the action.
I was going to say 21,000 in the ground, but I think it was about 10,000 kind of strewn across the streets of Fulwell, Roker and Seaburn, weren't there? And funny, talking about this to Lee Howie recently, and he was just saying when the coach was coming in and the players were coming in, he said it was just absolute carnage. He said he'd never seen anything like it. He said it was absolute chaos when the players were on their way to Roker Park that day.
So yeah, it's no wonder. I think you mentioned the other day that Gordon Armstrong wanted Newcastle for his testimonial a season or two later, and I think this would have been the final nail in the coffin of that idea, wouldn't it? Because
My one abiding memory actually of that was I hadn't until that day really realised how good Mark Hateley was.
Oh, he's brilliant, wasn't he? That's a stand-up memory from that game.
And I always thought, I remember he had England caps and he went up to, and I just thought, he's gone up to Scotland. Sorry, Kelvin, because he's not very good. even though to be fair, Rangers had a great side then. But when I saw him in the flesh, I thought, God, he's a great player. Yeah.
He'd probably do even better these days.
He was an athlete, wasn't he?
Oh.
He was a real athlete, Haley, and he could play a bit with the ball. Yeah.
I think was there a game Rangers played Leeds in a European? I can't remember if it was the season before this or the season after this, but I think Rangers turned Leeds over, and Haley was outstanding in that game as well.
That was like one of the kind of, because we hadn't had a Battle of Britain for years, had we? And then it was just typical when it did come around that it was a crap Leeds side who basically fell apart after the back pass rule came in. So they won the league because they had Chris Fairclough and Chris White at the back who could just pass it back to John Lugage. And then as soon as the rule change came in, I think they almost were relegated the next season when they were kind of trying to get in the Champions League. But yeah, the Rangers absolutely tore them apart. And you think about it with Haley, you think almost criminal he didn't get more England caps. You think him up front with Lineker and stuff. Surely that would have been, you're onto a winner there, surely you would think.
Well, yeah, you think, and again, different times you would have had all sorts of caps, wouldn't he? Yeah. But obviously, Ali McCoy didn't play in this game, which was always a big disappointment to me. But the other thing I remember strongly about this game, Derek Ferguson turned in a performance. Finally, that was probably about 10 times better than anything else he went on to do for us, because he absolutely dominated that game.
But he was. I thought he was a brilliant midfielder. He just had. Look, I think he had well publicised problems that kind of almost came to the fore not long after this, didn't it? But I thought, and you speak to some former players and you say that on the training ground when he was playing, you could see he was a classy midfielder, but we never saw it on the pitch. And I always thought you wanted him just to get going at Sunderland. Then you just thought once he gets going, he's going to be absolutely fantastic for us. And he was. He had it all to be a brilliant midfielder.
And you kind of thought with Terry Butcher as manager as well, who knew him from Rangers, he would have been set up to do it well. But obviously, shortly after this, the car crash incident happened with the new signings and all that sort of stuff, which really hampered that start of the season. Moving on to July the 29th, Andy Reid was born in Dublin in 1982. The year after the Rangers game, Bobby Robson brought Porto to Roker Park for Gordon Armstrong's testimonial. We won that one 2-0. 1999, a Swedish international midfield player, Stefan Schwarz, signed from Valencia for what was then a record fee of 3.75 million. And Stefan Schwarz is somebody who I'd love to talk at length about, but not today. But he was an absolutely sort of class above signing, wasn't he? He was one of those players, we're talking about a few players who are linked with the club currently, who to me kind of feel like a similar sort of stature and could make a similar impact. But Schwarz just oozed quality.
See, this is where it's good to have you back, Martin, because I would have spent the first hour on what we've already just been through to get onto the main ones. So you're already managing this properly. Well done, mate.
Yeah, I agree with you. Schwarz was brilliant. I loved him. I loved watching him. I think he came in and imposed himself on the midfield. If I remember rightly as well, we changed our game. Really changed our game a little bit when he came in, didn't he? We hardly had two flying wingers. I seem to think that it was him out there, wasn't it?
It was.
I'll really like them.
And that was always
really like him as a player.
It was always the interesting thing, wasn't it? Because if the thing, all that stuff hadn't happened with Alan Johnson, who we've talked about before, then you kind of think Johnson would have been a shoe-in on that left-hand side with Gray behind him. But Stefan Schwarz coming in there and kind of almost protecting Mickey Gray to some extent. He gave Gray the room to go into. And, that was a big factor in us having some relative success that season.
Mm.
That signing was huge because, and I've wrote a bit about it recently on this days because it's popped up. A couple of those dates came up where, at one point there was one day when Peter Reid transfer listed Lee Clark, Alan Johnson, and Michael Bridges all on the same day, and at that point we'd already lost or lost, Peter Reid decided that he didn't want to keep Andy Melville, who had played, I think he played 52 games that season. So we lost Melville, who played over 50 games. We basically lost Alan Johnson, who was one of the best players that season. Mickey Bridges, who everyone hung their hat on to replace kind of Quinney and coming through. Everyone loved him. And Lee Clark, obviously, who did his Wembley thing. But we'd just been promoted and we were trying to ride the crest of a wave and everything was falling apart. And we just thought, we're losing all these players. What's going to happen? We're going to go straight back down here. And then Peter Reid landed Stefan Schwarz, and that's basically where it all started.
You know, if you put in the parallels with today, it would be like us going up, and then within on the same days, people like, I don't know, Trey Hume, Joe Bellingham, and Eliza Mayenda all being transfer lists, and you go, what the hell's going on? And that had the potential to actually shatter all of that feel-good factor from us. We romped the league the season before. But he did, and I think it's kind of overlooked because of what happened subsequently. But Peter Reid did so well to actually pull that round, stop that from kind of flying off into any sort of direction, because it could have, couldn't it?
Well, to convince Schwarz to come.
Well,
for a start,
that's absolutely right. Yeah, it's a big. It was a big move. He was, he played for Arsenal in the top flight of English football, hadn't he? But he was a big name in international football at the peak of his career. Still a regular for Sweden. Big signing, very important signing. Also on the 29th of July, in 2004, we played, there's a little question coming, so pay attention here. 2004, we played a friendly match against Scunthorpe. Mick McCarthy was the manager. We drew 1-1. In the Scunthorpe lineup was a former Sunderland loanee. Do you have any idea who that might have been?
Ooh.
Is it obvious, or is it a bit of a tricky?
Oh, it's a bit. He was 30. I think he was 38 or 39 by the time this game was played.
Wow.
We can't have had many loanees before then, though, surely. Oh, it's not someone like.
Got some clues?
Oh, yeah, go on then.
I think it was 91, I think we signed him on loan.
Oh, Peter Beagrie.
Peter Beagrie. Yeah.
Oh, nice one.
For a long time, he was.
We only had one. We only had one player on loan that year.
Now, for a long time, Peter Beagrie was by far my favourite Sunderland loanee. Absolutely loved. He was only here for a month, wasn't he? But he was absolutely fantastic.
I tell you what, if potentially. It's one of those, again, sliding doors moments. If Dennis Smith had gone out and just bought Peter Beagrie and we had a bit of money rather than loaning him, chances are, and then he brought Burn-in and Goodman, chances are Dennis Smith might have been able to turn it around.
I suspect he probably would have done, because Beagrie was that good. At that level, he could have been outstanding for us.
I think he was struggling at Everton, and because he did so well with us, Everton just went, "Oh, thank you very much. He'll come straight back in." And
well, he was highly rated, wasn't he? He came through with Sheffield United and Borough before he went to Everton. But no, excellent player. Didn't he drive a motorbike through a hotel window? I've got a feeling that on a pre-season tour with Everton, Peter Beagrie drove a motorbike through a hotel window. Now, I'm going to note the time down. I'm going to Google that after we finish. And if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, Peter, but that's going to get cut out.
Should potentially move on from Peter Beagrie.
Did a good somersault, though. 30th of July.
Off the motorbike.
It's open to your interpretation. That I said nothing. July the 30th, 81, Ian Munro signed from Stoke City for 150 grand.
Psycho Munro.
That's Kelvin's first song for the evening, for the day. Probably won't be the last. 2007, we confirmed the signings of Steve Malbranc, Pascal Chimbonda, and Timo Tainio from Spurs. I remember I was at Headingley watching the cricket, and that news came through on my phone. And obviously there was a fourth member of that transfer who should have been there, but it didn't go through, and that was Yunus Kabul. And it's interesting actually with Kabul, because you kind of look back on that first attempt to get him, and everybody remembers his agent's comment about, he wouldn't sign for Sunderland if there was an earthquake or something like that. But when you read what happened sort of immediately after that, Kabul was kind of going, actually, no, I'm quite interested in this. Kabul came up for talks and had talks with Roy Keane, and it was looking very likely that he would sign and join the other three. But then there was a London club came in for him, and then also Portsmouth. Now, I think obviously that kind of threw the whole thing off course, but he's often always remembered for that earthquake comment. But actual fact, the move was quite close to happening before he went elsewhere. But he did come to the Stadium of Light eventually, and he only stayed for a season, didn't he? But he was a quality player.
I thought he really was a quality player, and argued the case in the 10 best centre-halves, I think, pod that we had. I really liked him. I thought he was a good player, and came at the right time to us as well. Really helped Coney, I think. He made Coney look better than he was, in my opinion. But
he probably had the right manager for him at Sunderland at that spell with Allardyce as well. And then obviously he went to Watford, didn't he? And Moyes flogged him to Watford, which again, you could argue if he'd stayed that season, that could have been a whole different story.
He should never be forgotten for his. He should never be forgotten either for his humanitarian work after moving here following the earthquake. That was that was greatly appreciated by the local community. That he deemed himself able to come and sign for us eventually.
It was a signing that registered on the Richter scale up here, didn't it?
Now, we've skipped to the 30th of July there. On the 29th of July in 2017, we had that infamous game at home to Celtic where we got turned over 5-0, and Jason Steele did his best impression of not being a goalkeeper. But it's often forgotten that game was to celebrate 20 years at the Stadium of Light. So you kind of often remember that game for the context of when it took place and the results. But that was supposed to be a game to celebrate 20 years at the Stadium of Light. 10 years earlier, we played Juventus for the 10th anniversary of the Stadium of Light, because on the 30th of July in 1987, there was helicopters, there was status quo, there was Mark Walter's cousin juggling the football around the side of the pitch. Ajax were in town because, Chris, the Stadium of Light was officially open for business.
It was, and we've touched on a few bits and pieces, haven't we, with coming up to this date in the previous on this week's, because obviously this was kind of a long-term process, wasn't it? And we've talked previously that we feel very lucky and privileged to have experienced Roker Park, even though I'm still, even though I experienced Roker Park, I'm still devastated that I didn't feel like I experienced the real Roker Park. Because I feel like if you go back, 20 years before I went, I'm trying to think, probably 20 years before I went. I think the first kind of, it started getting cut down early 80s, didn't it? The Roker End, when it was starting to be deemed dangerous, maybe late 70s when it started to really go. So you're kind of going back to the 60s, early 70s, those big games, those cup games and stuff where you're talking 40,000, 50,000 or whatever at those games. And you see old pictures of the Roker End, and you just wanted to experience it while it was like that. And, growing up and experiencing Roker Park, you thought that was football, and you thought that was standing on the terraces smelling Bovril and, smelling whatever the guy in front had produced, and you couldn't get rid of it because you were packed in tight on the terraces, fellas smoking woodbines and all that sort of stuff. But it was the smells, it was kind of just the feeling of going to what you felt was a football ground. And Roker Park still had that football ground feeling, and we started going to these new stadiums, and we, in that, especially that first season in the Premier League, when things started to change. You know, Borough had done it, and everything was kind of, or Borough was about to do it. I think a year later they were there, and kind of St James's Park had already changed into an all-seater. And we've been talking about the build-up, and we were talking about the huge kind of deal in terms of the auction. I think we mentioned that on a previous the auction at Roker Park, so you were able to wander around. And there was part of you, and I talked to John Ficklin about this when we did the podcast with him, that they had to do a big PR exercise, because actually there was a lot of fans who didn't want to move. They were kind of, it was almost this clinging on to it, thinking, why can't we just redevelop Roker Park?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because obviously we were talking about this in 1997, but this has been a 7-year, 8-year process. You know, we've been talking about moving grounds from 1990. If you remember the ballot or the referendum, wasn't it, that was sent out to Gold Card members to sort of gauge opinion on whether you wanted to move away from Roker Park or stay at Roker Park. And it was sent out to all of the Gold Card members. I think it was 30,000 or so Gold Card members at the time. And if you don't know what a Gold Card is, ask your dad or your granddad. But the whole thing which Bob Murray had done was you only had to reply to the referendum and send your thing back if you wanted to stay at Roker Park. And I don't think it was free post either. So you had to buy a stamp, send it back if you disagreed. Now, in terms of fairness, I'm sure the Fairness Commission, if there was such a thing, would probably have a hole or two to pick in that process. And I think looking at it, I think maybe 1,500 or so people said they want to stay at Roker Park. So 1,500 out of 30,000 is a small percentage of people who disagreed with Bob's vision. And we had a whole thing where there was talks with Nissan, wasn't there, for years and years, trying to get the Wembley of the North. And there was even talk about bloody ground sharing with Newcastle at that site. There was going to be bowling alleys and all sorts of things up at Washington. I'm so glad, again, when you look at sort of sliding doors moments, I'm so glad that didn't come off, because I think that would have been an awful move for the club. Obviously, at the same time, the Weymouth Collieries shutting down, I think that was still operational for the first 3 years that the club were talking about moving ground. So then this whole thing transpired. But as you say, Chris, even after going through all of that and getting used to that prospect, which, it wasn't exactly sprung on us overnight, there was still an awful lot of people who didn't want to move.
Yeah, but you say that, Martin, actually, and you're absolutely right in saying that it was a long, kind of almost drawn out process of that 7-8 years whenever we started talking about that Nissan side. But the problem is we became transfixed on the Nissan side, and then it went on for so long. And again, John Ficklin talks about it, where when he came to the club, which was it was early in 1994, because basically the money that he invested went straight on Brett Angel. I mean, he's built up all this money, invested in the club, and it just goes straight on Brett Angel. He must have been over the moon at the time. But the thing is, he said when he came in, we were still in talks with Nissan. That was all rumbling on. And the strange, and that's when Peter Reid was appointed, basically weeks after he came to the club. Now, what then happened though, Martin, because I think everyone just thought, this is just something that will never happen. It had already been 5-6 years and people had been rumbling about it. We'd seen the drones. I remember those drones, the Wembley of the North. Everyone thought this is going to be fantastic. But what happened was suddenly it went from this, it'll never happen, we'll always be at Roker Park because they'll just not get it over the line. Nissan's always going to say no because of where it is. And then suddenly the colliery became available and the club just suddenly shifted really quickly. And those talks happened really quickly with the local authorities. And suddenly this was a thing. And then after that, it actually seemed to happen really quickly. So people had to change their mindsets from this'll never happen to this is a reality and this is happening. And the other kind of complex thing in that was that we were in trouble at the time. We were battling against relegation to the 3rd division for a good few years. And then Peter Reid came in and changed that, but the club was still ploughing ahead with it. So we still couldn't see it happening because we were fighting relegation in the 2nd tier. So nothing kind of tied in, like nothing it didn't feel like a reality that it was ever going to happen. And then when it did start to happen, people were going, oh, well, we don't necessarily want to move. And then there might be problems. I remember with the earth basically at the colliery that they had to get it treated, and they didn't know how they were going to get that done because there was dangers with all that. So all this was kind of going on. And then it genuinely came out the blue where it was, then we were going through that season where we were getting promoted, and then it said it was kind of, this thing's getting built now and we're moving, and next season is going to be the last season. It was almost sprung on people like that.
No, it wasn't. You kind of look through the almost a chronological order of how things happened. And 2 years before the stadium opened, we didn't even have planning permission for a stadium. We didn't have permission to build anything on. The initial plans were for a 34,000 capacity stadium. Obviously, things went along, but I think it was November 95 when we finally got the okay to actually build. So within 18 months, they got the thumbs up to build, and we'd opened the stadium with bloody playing the football match in it.
Yeah.
So, as you say, we'd had this long build-up to the prospect of moving, but when it actually came about, it was very, very quick to get it turned around.
Yeah. So it was amazing, this whole process, and it kind of happened. And you were watching the stadium come up thinking, what is it? How is it going to be? And we had this last season at the stadium, at Roker Park, that you had to almost get through. And there was a countdown. I always remember because I had a season ticket in the full end for that last season. And there was a countdown at the back of the Roker end. Like you could see every home game, and it was going down, how many games to go. And I remember looking at that, and it was kind of almost this, you had this kind of shadow of relegation happening, fighting that and thinking you're going to leave Roker Park. And then I remember the Everton game thinking I didn't want to leave that day. And then I went to the Liverpool game. I didn't want to leave the Roker Park that day. And then we're relegated. And it's kind of, I remember at the Liverpool game, the players were doing a lap of honour to leave Roker Park, and you didn't know whether to clap or cry or you didn't know how to feel. And then you had this few weeks to kind of gather your thoughts, and then it comes to we had the Nearman ceremony, which didn't go as planned really, because they did that thing at midnight, and everyone was expecting the Weymouth Stadium or something like that, and then suddenly it's the Stadium of Light, and there's almost protests on that day, and John Ficklin and Bob Murray had to run back into the stands because the fans were trying to get at them and shout at them and say, why the hell are you naming it that? And it was just, nothing seemed to be going right or feel right. And we had this huge thing that was about to happen. And we talked a lot about the ticket office last time, because that opened the week before, and that was still smelling of paint, and they were sending people multiple season tickets that they'd never paid for, and Ajax tickets weren't getting sent out, and it was just an absolute shambles. And then we get to the 30th of July when it's actually happening. I remember they put on all this entertainment and all this sort of stuff. And I freely admit that I was in the pub until kickoff. So I did miss status quo and all of that. So I arrived kind of 5 minutes before kickoff. So I didn't see all of that. I've seen footage of it and all that, but I can't say I experienced it. But all I remember, and I'm sure this will be true for every fan who went that night, because it went to Roker Park. But I remember coming in, I remember being in the concourse, and I remember watching. I went down numerous times when it was getting built, but I hadn't quite realised, and it just hadn't dawned on us. I was fairly young. I was in my teens. These things, teens don't take these things in. But I remember I hadn't quite realised that it was sunk into the ground. So the bottom tier was lower.
Yeah.
So when you saw it from the outside, you saw this ball. And I remember when it was being built and you could see inside and you thought it looks big, but when you just saw it from the outside and it was finished, you didn't quite grasp the scale of it. And then when you walked in through the turnstile, and the first thing you did, I mean, I remember even before you took in what was in the concourse, the gangway was right in front of me in the north stand, and I walked, because you went in your correct turnstile at the first time and all that. You did everything properly. You walked into the gangway and you could see the kind of the summer evening, and you could see the sky, and you were kind of, because all the courseways, the gangways, kind of, they tilt up towards the stadium when you're walking up, so you can't really see much until you get over like that lip. and then you just start seeing it and you realise half the stadium is lower than you. Yeah. And you start looking up and looking around, because at that time, of course, there was only the West Stand concourse. That was the bigger tier. The North Stand wasn't done at that time. And I remember just looking up, but there was just a big crowd on this gangway that came out of the concourse, because everybody was just stood there with their mouths open, just staring at everything, just trying to take it all in. And the feeling, you could just see it in everyone's faces going, this isn't ours. Have we nicked it, or have we, this isn't kind of our stadium. And it was, to do that walk at that time, and I'll genuinely never forget it. And I remember, I can visualize it. I can see myself doing it, and I can see everything opening up, and I can feel myself looking around going, it just absolutely blew me away that this was Sunderland Football Club Stadium.
No, that's right. I tell you what I love as well, and obviously there was a relatively brief moment in time when you could do this, but those aerial photos of the stadium light complete and Roker Park still there, are fantastic. And you kind of lose track of how close they are together, but they were exceptionally close, really. But as a new stadium, you were kind of going through this thing, weren't you, where I think Borough, he said, Chris, Derby had gone into Pride Park, and there was one or two others, Stoke. And they all seemed to have kind of identical grounds where you had a couple of the sides open and you had 3 and 1 or whatever it was. And our ground, I don't know whether it's looking at it through red and white spectacles and up, our ground just seemed to be better. It seemed to be different. It seemed to have some character to it.
Well, again, John Ficklin talks about this, and he thought exactly the same thing as what you've just said. And he said one thing they didn't want to do was make it like Pride Park at the time, the Riverside, the Britannia. I remember the Britannia had corners that weren't filled in and things like that. I think Molineux had tried to do it, and they had similar, where they had 4 stands, and it wasn't great. And I think they looked, and they did a lot of research at how to do things like that, and they made sure it wasn't that identikit stadium. And we need to, but as well as that, we need to talk about the price, because they did it for about 20 million.
I think instrumental to all of this was that decision to have the pitch lowered and the bottom tier built into the banks of the ground, because you mentioned earlier, the actual construction was relatively quick, Chris, and that was, I think it might have even been Ficklin's idea, this. If you have the lower tier sunken into the ground, you're saving a lot on steel costs and construction times. So all these other grounds were kind of just built directly up from the ground, whereas we did it slightly differently. It was the first time a club had done that. I think our ground is bigger than all of the other ones as well. And since then, this idea has been taken on elsewhere, I believe. But that, such a simple decision, just unlocked so many possibilities.
That's it. It also meant you could go up easier, because you were starting from a lower base. And the other things that Bob Murray, they thought, they did this. They didn't do it kind of off the hoof. They really kind of thought about it, because they also, he's talked about it since, because he helped Wembley out, or he tried to in this terms, but he also made sure he bought all the land around it, so Sunderland could control what was around the actual stadium itself, and they could do all of that. But I'm talking about the fans' perspective at this time, because again, talking to John Ficklin, he, not in so many words, I can't remember whether he actually came out and said it. He might have actually, but he pretty much said it shouldn't have really opened that night against Ajax. He said it wasn't. He said it wasn't ready. And Martin, I was just going you might have told it before, but you got inside knowledge, didn't you, just before?
No, that's what I was going to say. I'm sure I've told this on the podcast before. It could just be me and you having the crack off air. But the day before this game, me and my mate Neil went down to the stadium light just to have a dodge around, just see what was going on, see how things were shaping up. And it was a building site. There was people carrying, people in orange jackets carrying steel girders around. There was all sorts of work going on. It looked, I tell you, if you'd said there's going to be a football match here tomorrow with 40,000 people, you would have said, I'll give you bloody long odds on that, because there was so much work still needs to happen. It was absolute chaos. I don't know how on earth they got it ready for the opening game, but there was a load of people sort of queued up outside one of the turnstile entrances on the east stand. So me and Neil went over and we said, we'll have a look what's going on there. And one of the turnstiles opened, and the fella came, so right, come in. So we thought, champion, right, Dad's right, we'll go in. So we sort of joined the back of the queue, and this fella said, "Oh, you here for the induction?" We went, yeah, we're here for the induction, aye. So he took us up, sat us in the seats in the east stand, and for about 45 minutes or an hour, we were given this induction on how to pull pints, where the pies were coming from, how to serve people, the customer service standards that were going to be expected at the Stadium of Light, all this sort of stuff. It was obviously the induction for the catering staff who were going to be working in all of the concourse bars. And so we sat there, we were just looking around and saying, going, this is meant, look at all this. It's as Chris goes, it's ours. So we got an early chance to see it. But then, they were kind of going, right, so who can work tomorrow night? And we were like, nah, sorry, we're busy tomorrow night. got a football match to go to. But no, so yeah, I got an earlier look at the almost completed Stadium of Light than some other people did.
Well, I think this was part of it, because I'm sure he said basically that there was the morning of the game, or the basically lunchtime of the game, there was actually an inspection to sign it off. And John Ficklin basically said, this fella who came round from the council, I mean, the pressure that must have been on him, because imagine if he was the one who made the decision going 20, 30 years later, where everyone's talking about this inspector who said the game couldn't go on. I mean, his name would be kind of one of the biggest in Sunderland history, wouldn't it, if he delayed the opening of the stadium? Because, of course, this was the last friendly before we kicked off against Chelsea, so it was like a week before. So if they delayed
it was season before, wasn't it? It was kicking off against Sheffield United. So we had the Man City.
Oh, that was it. You're right. So it was about 10 days before or something like that. I think we had another game, and that was away to Carlisle. But I think they would have still struggled to say, oh, well, we've got 40,000 people rocking up tonight. People who'd already turned up to Sunderland from God knows where, or on their way there, and then say, oh, the game's off. Because, I mean, but imagine the PR with a club there if they couldn't get the stadium ready. So this guy basically just had to sign the form. I mean, he just turned up to go, yeah, it's not ready. And but the other thing, we're talking about decisions, and one of the decisions was to go heavy on corporate and the kind of the facilities behind the scenes in the West Stand. And one of the things that they did differently as well was build all the offices outside. And that was a really big decision to say, we're not just going to have it in one confined stadium. We're going to build, and I think that complex cost a good few million just to do outside and put all the offices in, which was originally the ticket office. And they decided to have that outside of the ground, which meant they had more kind of corporate hospitality facilities inside. And there was a good story as well, because it was kind of, we're talking about the levels, and you had to go down to the dressing rooms. The players are getting ready, and Peter Reid starting to get in the dressing room and all this sort of stuff. And John Ficklin said, as he's kind of ready to talk to the players and things like that, basically the ceiling in the dressing room starts to leak, and there's some sort of liquid coming through the ceiling, dripping down. And Peter Reid's thinking it's like the toilet's up above and all this. So he's like going mad. He's talking to people, and he's like, you need to get this sorted. It's leaking into in the home dressing room here. It's pissing down in here. And John Ficklin gets involved. Someone tells him, he's like, oh, great, I want to find out what's going on here. And he said he works out, it's actually the beer pumps from up above. And basically there's basically lager dripping into the home team dressing room. So he said, Reedy being Reedy, he says, oh, that's all right, no bother, we'll crack on with it. Don't worry about that. And keep it coming. But the other thing with John Ficklin, he said, one of the interesting stories, he said something like, he didn't rate it. One of his mates ended up telling him, because he said, because it was all rushed, because they wanted to sell pints on the opening day, and they wanted everyone to have a beer on the Ajax game. and get used to that, because God, we'd never done that at Roker Park, great, just to get a pie in the full end took, it was like an expedition, the base camp to go and get a pie or a bovril at half time and get back to where you were. So to sell pints, it was a novel thing. And because it was all rushed, they needed a licensee. And John Ficklin just went, right, yeah, look, I'll be the licensee for now or whatever. Yep, stick my name on it. And he realised, so one of his mates turned around, and I think it was on the night when everyone was having a pint and all this, he said, you do realise you're the licensee for the biggest pub in the northeast, don't you? Right. And he went, I'll take that, actually. There's like 40,000 people potentially, most of them are having a pint tonight, and I'm the licensee. But yeah, but it was absolute chaos. And I remember, you think about Premier Passions, and there was a few interviews with local journalists. And I remember the kind of some of the Echo journalists at the time trying to talk to John Ficklin and Bob Murray at the time, saying, is it going to be ready? Is it going to be ready? And they were going, yeah, of course, we're going to be ready for this Ajax game. And, they hadn't realised it hadn't been signed on the dotted line. And, Sunderland City Council still had to decide. But all that season, decisions were being made on the fly. I mean, again, you look at Premier Passions, Bob Murray's kind of sorting out the taps in the executive bathrooms, and which kind of got him mocked for some reason, because these decisions have to be made, don't they? I mean, it doesn't matter what's going on at the club. If this has been built, it's being built. And they did things like, but again, they did things like that was suggested to them, because somebody said where the pitch is and how it's orientated, the pitch won't get any light. So they actually changed the design of the roof in the south stand and the west stand at the time to put panels in, so the pitch would actually get some light, because until then they realised that it wasn't going to. But that wasn't something they thought of until halfway through. So it was all these things that was kind of going into it. And like I said, that the price, when you think about it, because I think you're talking, you look at the price of Spurs Stadium. I know it was years later, whatever, but even if you converted, Sunderland's ground cost something like £20 million, and they got funding from here, there, and everywhere to kind of help us pay for it at the time. But yeah, and then there was, of course, the game itself, with Ajax coming, and I think they'd get into the European Cup semi-finals. I think I can't remember, Champions League semi-final that season. And so and Patrick Kluivert had just left, but they still had a cracking team. You look at it was Van der Sar in goal, Mario Melchiot, Danny Blind, the De Boer brothers, Sunday Elise, Danny Vitske, Babangida, Gerald Sebon, who Sheffield Wednesday fans absolutely love looking back on, and Michael Laudrup. And there was a young Martin Reusser on the bench as well, who came on, who ended up going to Ipswich and having a few years there. But yeah, it was a big game, because it kind of, I think this was the flip moment. And don't get me wrong, we didn't start that season particularly well, but I still think this got the goodwill back and made people realise what was happening at the club, because that relegation hit us pretty hard. I think people thought that relegation could have been avoided. There was a little bit of anger, I think, at that relegation at the time. I think we thought that we tried to wing it a little bit, with the signing of Waddle. And this game, I think, really helped to kind of flip things a little bit and give us a bit of positivity going into the season, which I think we needed at the time. We needed a bit of a pick-me-up, and this was it, I think.
I think the feeling was that the club were concentrating on getting the stadium built and putting the money into this, and that had been at the expense of the team. And I think that there's hope that we would stay up. Obviously, we came very close to staying up, but yeah, it could have been a really sort of bad state of affairs, couldn't it, if we'd gone into the stadium and really struggled. I know you say we didn't start the season that well, and we had a few dodge. I think we lost 3 out of the first 4 that season, but we kind of got on track a little bit. But it did take a good 5 or 6 months to feel like the team was at home at the stadium, right, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, just to go back a little bit onto a bit of a bad feeling. I just wanted to ask any of you if you did see the pre-match entertainment, because I missed out on all that.
I saw all of it. I was there before I saw the helicopter come in. I saw everything going on.
No, I missed all
Yeah.
that. Rocked up as the players were coming out.
One of the things I bought my son and his best pal. And one of the things they still talk about now, if you ask them about that day, they talk about the status quo fan who ran onto the pitch and was dancing and frick. Can you remember that? If you thought they tried to take him away about 3 or 4 times, and he just kept running back on. And at the end, the crowd were like chanting for the police just to leave him. And he danced through status quo's whole set by himself in front of 40,000 people. I thought he looked remarkably like yourself, Chris, actually, when I think about it.
Maybe that's why Chris is denying all knowledge, because he's still a wanted man.
I'm pretty sure I was in the Howard Arms, I think, when he was
in the Howard Arms
when he was dancing about.
It was massively entertaining, that. Yeah.
He did get caught, because I remember him being sent down, deeper and down, Kelvin.
Hey.
I thought Andrew had been quiet. I could see the cogs turning. But yeah, it was. And then we had it was a Republica, because we had wasn't it the new kind of music to run out to, and I'm not quite sure the story about how that was all decided. I'm not sure I've ever heard that from within the club whose idea that was. That'd be quite an interesting thing to get into. But yeah, then Status Quo did the helicopter thing, did the lip sync. Of course, they got that, and then pretended to play some guitars and got paid probably handsomely for it. And yeah, and then they got in, and I can't remember too much about the game except loving our new kits. Although I hadn't realised by this point how much the away kit made you sweat and how heavy it was by that point. It looked good at first sighting, but and I thought the home kit with the collars and everything and the buttons, I thought it was a lovely kit to kick off in a new stadium.
You're right, but everything was changing. The badge had changed, the kit had changed, the stadium had changed. Just touching back on something earlier there, you said you didn't know the background to the Republica Ready to Go selection. I seem to think a few people have claimed credit for picking the Dance of the Nights, because that was groundbreaking as well. You didn't have teams coming out onto the pitch to classical music. It was a bit like, when in Italy '90 the BBC played Pavarotti. And then every BBC exec go and claimed, "Oh, it was my idea to pick that tune." I think a few people at the stadium wanted their name to be the one remembered, because that was, again, perhaps just a little thing, but just the amount of thought that was put into all of these things really helped it feel like a completely new club we were supporting.
Yeah. When you think about it, it's an incredible time to actually experience. And when you're in it and it's happening, you don't actually acknowledge the size and the scale of what's happening to the football club. You don't realise how much it's changing. You're actually just looking to the next game and the next season and what's going to happen. Are we going to get promoted? And you don't realise that we're completely. It's a one event that happened once a century. That you move a stadium like that, and to change a badge, you might do that 3 times a century or something. Maybe had how many badges? 4. We've had 3 or 4 badges. And then, to go through all of that and just to completely reinvent the club, and you not really realise it's happening. You do, but you don't. You're not transfixed on it. You're not kind of hung up on it. But then you look at what's happening on the pitch, and you look at the team that went out, and we had Lee Clark and Kevin Phillips in the side that night, who basically weren't part of the side who got relegated. So on the pitch, you're thinking, "Oh, we need some new players. We need 1 or 2 to come in." And I think Jody Craddock actually signed on that day, and was whisked straight to the Stadium of Light, because he said he was kind of taking it all in from that perspective. But yeah, the only thing I really remember about the game, I can't remember much. I remember just staring around. The other thing, I found my seat really quickly. I remember everyone was surrounding this steward, And I just realised, I went, I can see the letters. I'm just going to go up and find my seat. And I just went up and I found it. But loads of people were standing in rows, kind of looking at their book, looking down at the seat number, going, I'm in the wrong place here. Am I in the wrong stand? Am I in the wrong row? people just spinning around on the spot, not having a clue where. And then there was the phantom row that didn't exist, that was sold. And you could see people going all the way up to the top, counting, and then going, hang on, looking down at their book, looking down at the row, and then going, thinking their seat doesn't actually exist, which it didn't. And somebody had numbered them all wrong, so they'd numbered the same row and they'd started from different positions and all this, and it was just absolute chaos. I remember I think there was people still trying to get in when the game kicked off, and still loads of people trying to find their seats and things like this as the game kicked off. But yeah, so I can't really remember much about the game. The only thing I really kind of vaguely remember is Bowley's disallowed goal, with Jeff Winter being a fun guy as usual. And
Jeff Winter,
yeah.
There was a infamous moment. Do you remember in the World Cup? I think it was Zaire had a free kick and the player ran out from the wall and just booted the ball away.
Yeah. Dickie Order, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. I remember the Zaire thing was always a bit of a laugh and joke about it, but seemingly the story behind it was that he was making some sort of political protest in the end.
Yeah, right.
You know, I think at the time people just assumed, look at this idiot, he doesn't know how football meant to operate. But yeah, Dickie O did something very similar in front of, that must have been the North Stand then. I don't know if it was called something else back then.
No, it was all just northeast, southwest, and
yeah.
No, actually, I don't think it was, because I was flicking through the program today. It was talking about the McEwen stand. So
was it officially then? Though?
Well, let me consult my reading literature.
I thought it was a little bit later, but you might be right.
Officially speaking, the North Stand at present, I think, is still called the Carling Stand. And nobody seems to refer to it as that. But yeah, I'm pretty sure, because I remember that being a story that Scottish and Newcastle won the contract to supply the beer at the ground and not Vaux. I remember that being a little bit of a talking point.
So, sorry, the McEwen stand was the West Stand.
There you go.
And the Metro,
I thought it was the East Stand.
Yeah. The Metro FM stand was the South Stand.
Yeah, because they had Metro FM on the scoreboards, didn't they?
Yeah, they did.
Mm-hmm.
And even that was novel, having those scoreboards.
I couldn't say scoreboards that weren't stuck on attack.
Yeah.
For 90 minutes.
And actually, on the last thing I remember actually is thinking, and I've just brought a memory there, but thinking Chris Byrne was brilliant. I remember that.
Oh, he could have been an absolute star, Chris Byrne. He could have been. So that, again, that's, I tell you what, that's somebody you try to get for an interview, Chris.
That
would be a great one. But
Kevin Phillips played well that night as well in that game. I think he showed with that night that because he was relatively unheard of.
He was.
He played well that night, I thought. It must have been a success. You know, I'm sitting here thinking when you said before we moved, you know, we had the protest about leaving Roker Park and then the furore about the naming of the stadium, but the speed at which all that disappeared, you know, it just seemed to disappear, didn't it?
No, it did.
All of that. Yeah.
It did.
Probably job done, but I think it had something to do with the way the team was playing as well. What was happening on the pitch was okay.
Yeah.
It was.
Chris said it earlier, I think. I think Chris said we were almost reinventing the club. I think that was the phrase you used, Chris. But that's exactly what happened. Because Sunderland, we loved Sunderland, and we still do, obviously, but at the time, Sunderland were kind of seen as a sleeping giant in a ground that was past its best days. And then overnight, we've got the newest stadium in the country. It's getting all of these UEFA qualifications, and I think it was 5-star rated, which meant that it was able to host international games and what have you. It was a real kind of figure point for the club and the city in general. It completely changed our image from an old club that has seen better days to then this forward-thinking club. It was massive. It really did change the way other people saw Sunderland AFC.
Yeah. And just to start with, I remember every night the big massive floodlights that it ended up costing them too much to put on every night. But you could see them. I could see them from my house in Fulwell every night, massive big spotlights, and they shone them every single night until they realised this is ridiculous, costing us thousands of pounds. And I think didn't it have something like, wasn't it airlines or airports were saying these are a bit strong these to be shining them every night? I'm sure there was something like that.
It might have been a story that Bob concocted to make turning them off seem more palatable. But we'll move on from the stadium light because I've got news about Peter Beagrie. So Peter Beagrie, in 1991, while on Everton's pre-season tour of Spain, now this is The Guardian, right? So it's not me making things up. Peter Beagrie went on a boozy night out following a game with Real Sociedad. In the early hours, he flagged down a Spanish motorcyclist who gave him a lift home. Upon arriving at his hotel, he couldn't wake the night porter, so Beagrie commandeered the bemused Spaniard's bike, rode up the hotel steps, and straight through the plate glass window. Only it was the wrong hotel. Beagrie required 50 stitches. So, Peter Beagrie motorbikes, I was correct. And it's interesting, this is an article, I'm going off a complete tangent here, but this is an article about the 10 worst examples of footballers behaving badly. Sunderland connections, Frank Worthington's number 1, how his move to Liverpool fell through in 1972. There's a Sunderland connection with Peter Shilton, because his 1980 story is about a country lane and being found with Tina, and Shilton always said the Sunderland crowd were the last ones to keep shouting Tina or chanting Tina at him whenever he played at Roker Park. They were the people with the longest memories. Peter Beagrie was number 3. Don Hutchinson came in at number 4. So there was and I can't remember if it was a On This Week pod or the Best Midfielders pod, but you lads were talking about Don Hutchinson. And I was really disappointed Budweiser didn't get mentioned because that the story about Don Hutchinson on tour with Liverpool and Budweiser makes it in number 4. I love Roy Evans, who was a Liverpool manager at the time. Roy Evans' quote in that after all of that happened, Roy Evans said, "If Hutchinson's flashing his cock again, that's out of order." So I think...
What did he do wrong, Martin?
I'll leave that for other people to make their minds up about that one. Dwight York and Ali McCoy are also in that top 10. So we've got a fairly good representation in that top 10 from 2001. So if anybody wants to dig that out, they are more than welcome. But we'll move back on to more sedate things, I think. July 31st, John McPhail signs from Bristol City in 1987. We've talked about Kevin Ball's testimonial in 1991. In 2001, we played a friendly away at Plymouth. We won 3-0. But it was a testimonial for a former Sunderland player. Can anybody think who that was?
Was that Mickey Heathcote?
That was Mickey Heathcote, who North East lad. I think he played a few games for us in late 80s, early 90s. Came from Spennymoor, if I remember correctly. But yeah, he went on to serve Plymouth well. And also on the 31st of July 1964, Alan Brown's tenure his spell at Roker Park. I think this was his first spell at Roker Park, wasn't it? He resigned after leading the club to promotion. He went to join Chef Wed. And Kelvin, I think the day before, in July the 30th, in 1957, so 7 years earlier, he became Sunderland's manager for the first time.
He did. And Alan Brown, for fans of that generation, he is definitely a bit of a Marmite character. Love him or hate him, he had a massive impact on the club and arrived at a crucial time in our history. the club were reeling from the Mr. Smith scandal, the illegal payments. On top of that, what seems to get lost a little bit in that is we'd paid a lot of money over a period of time for a team that hadn't been that successful. So there were a couple of things going on there. And despite the money spent, would never been relegated, but would come close in that period before Brown arrived. The scandal, I mean, I think, probably been loads written and loads still to be written and discussed. We'll try not to get dragged too much into that, but it is the reason why he's here. The board are looking for a specific kind of character to try and lead the club away from this terrible situation for the club. You've still got people who were around at the time, the old worthies on the bus, who I chat to sometimes say it took the club 30 years to recover from that scandal, so it impacted for over 3 decades, according to them.
Sorry, Kelvin, I'll just interrupt there, because I was listening to the pod that you all did with Rob Mason, and he said that he's very strongly hinted at the identity of Mr. Smith in his book What If, and anybody with half a brain, essentially, is what you're saying, could put the pieces together and figure out who Mr. Smith was. Now, if Rob's listening, I've read that chapter back again 5 or 6 times, and I'm still clutching at straws in terms of who I think it is. I've done my best Poirot impersonation. I haven't called the suspects into a room or anything yet, but it might not be as clear as Rob thinks. Or I might just be thick.
Martin, I thought we weren't going to mention this because it's the same for all of us.
Speak for yourself.
I was purely speaking for myself there.
A little known fact: Mr. Smith's grandson was the fellow that did the inspection at the Stadium of Light. When you were saying talk about being under pressure to sign it off, if it had turned out to be a family member of Mr. Smith, the guy wouldn't have been welcome back in the city, I don't think.
Oh my goodness, the hours and the hours of discussion that's gone on about this, I cannot tell you. Just on the bus going to the game,
I bet
there's been arguments and all sorts about it. It's a remarkable period in our history, but I tend to agree with the old boy on the bus. I think it probably did, when you start reading about that period and what happened after that. It probably did affect the club for a long time.
Just on that, Kelvin. Sorry, because I did something about the history. This was a few years ago, but I said before we first got relegated, we had an average league position of something like 8th in the top flight. After that first relegation, it was something like 8th in the second tier. So actually, I'd argue that the club never really recovered from it.
Yep. There's a lot of what ifs. I've got a couple of them. I'll try and remember to flag them up if we don't overrun. But terrible time for the club and effect that it had on the club. You could say, how long could Murray have gone on managing? The Bill Murray managing, how long could that have gone on? Because a lot of money had been spent, and we weren't really any closer. I think we had 2 semi-finals in the 50s to look back on, and I think we finished 3rd at one point, but that was it. Not much else to shout about during that period. So they're looking around for a manager. They're looking around for the right kind of character. And Alan Brown, who's managing at Burnley and had been there for about 3 years, having prior to that coached at Sheffield Wednesday. And I'm mentioning that because these are all teams that then figure again. He's been there 3 years. He's put into place a fantastic youth development system at Burnley with he and a chap called Charlie Ferguson. He brought Charlie Ferguson in at Burnley when he was there, and they implemented, with the help of their chairman, Bob Lord, a fantastic youth development system, as well as overseeing the building of a new kind of training academy building. And it's quite interesting looking at the story even behind that. You get a kind of taste for the kind of lad Brown was. He used to volunteer the first team players to go and work, to work a shift or work some hours helping labouring, building the academy at Burnley. And Jimmy Adamson was one of those players. Adamson would manage us in the next decade, the 70s. But so they're looking for the right kind of person, somebody that's going to, restore a bit of trust and pride and clean up the practice and the reputation of the club. And this lad, Alan Brown, he's got this reputation in football of integrity, hard work, honesty, and these high moral values. In the 60s, it came out. I don't know if he'd always been a member, but it was made public that he was a member of the International Moral Rearmament Crusade in the 60s, and that was the kind of lad that he was. He had a bearing of kind of military type bearing about him. He was a big centre half when he played, and he captained the three teams that he played for. So he was a leader of those three teams. He played for Burnley, Huddersfield, and finished his time at Notts County. But in between his, in the middle of his Huddersfield playing days, he stopped playing and went and was a policeman for 2 years. He just stopped and went and became a policeman for 2 years. So he's a man of an upstanding kind of character, if you want. And he also was notoriously contemptuous of illegal payments. He'd absolutely ensured that none of that was going on at Burnley. And that was payments to players, payments to clubs to sell them players, and payments to parents. If you let your son sign for us, we'll give you a bit of a backhand. He stopped all of that at Burnley. So this was the guy the sought out and bought to the club. But probably a lesser known fact is he was actually from the area. And the old worthies on the concert bus tell me that he was actually born in Concert. But everything I've looked at says he was born in Hexham and lived in Corbridge, and he actually was a Sunderland fan as a kidder. So I didn't know that until reasonably recently that he had been a Sunderland fan. He's appointed. He's on a £2,500 a year salary, which is pretty good going for the time. That's a good wedge of money for a club that's in trouble a bit financially. So it's a good wedge of money at the time. And I know not so much locally, but nationally, there was a bit of shock that he'd taken. Like some of the coverage said it's the toughest job in football on, and that he'd been I remember one of the reports I read, I think it was in The Guardian or something, one of the broadsheets, the master builder of a brilliant young Burnley side, and once described as one of the happiest managers in football at Burnley, has taken on the toughest job in football. And that's what he was coming to. He gets started, and one of the clever things that he does is gets Charlie Ferguson to come and manage the scouting system and get this youth development process rolling. And by gum, that was a great appointment for Sunderland. That lad does great business over long after Brown's gone. Ferguson's scouting network is doing great business for Sunderland. And the other lad that he brings in as a coach is a guy called George Curtis, who'd done some work with the England setup and the England under-21 setup. And he comes in, and it's a guy that he trusts both Ferguson and Curtis. And I think the people of a similar ilk to himself, So that's one of the earliest things he does. And one of the more immediate things that happens between Brown and Ferguson is Charlie Hurley's scouted, and he signs Hurley for the club, which you have to say, given everything that we know about Hurley and how he goes down with the Sunderland crowd, is a fantastic signing for the club. But as we've spoken before, it doesn't get off to the best of starts. He seems to want to replace, it's kind of out with the old and in with the new. He charged Ferguson with a task of finding keen young players, and that was both players to come into the youth system and players that they might go out and buy with the limited funds that they had at the time. He probably, I think I said last week, Stan Anderson's comment on all that was he could see what Brown was trying to do. He just felt he tried to do it too quickly. So he was replacing good pros, good players like Don Revie with young lads that hadn't quite found their feet in the game yet. But he does bring in one or two players. One player that Brown himself had lots and lots of good things to say about was Ernie Taylor. Now, Taylor's sort of probably better known for being the lad who Man United signed right after the air disaster to try and help get their club back on an even keel. And Taylor's playing is come towards the end of his own career, but he helps Man United re-establish themselves and recover from the air disaster. And I think Brown brings him in the hope that he can do a similar thing with Sunderland, but also recognising that he's a sort of guy similar-ish in ilk to himself, So he gets these young players in. He gets the youth development side of the game established at the club, but it does not go well, and they're relegated in 57-58, I think it is, relegation, first ever relegation. And he carries that on his CV because, as we know, he not only managed the club in its first relegation. When he comes back, he manages the club to a second relegation. But to be fair to Brown, the club's relegated, but he stays with them until they go back up again. He's a guy. He's coaching sort of credentials at the time, or loads and loads of people commenting on his coaching credentials and his innovations as a coach. Things like the innovator of short corners and of dead, fancy, clever free kicks, and
that's another one
like
we can claim, isn't it? We've had all sorts of Sunderland being at the forefront of football innovation.
I'm sorry, but if there's one thing in football I hate, it's short corners. You've got a free hit to get it into the area and get it and stick a nut on it, and then you pass it 5 yards. But so just to quickly touch on that, Kelvin, because you talked about the club sticking by him. I mean, is there a way to explain that? Because when you look at it, he comes in, he gets relegated, and then we struggle in the second division, which is unprecedented back then. We'd never been in the second tier, never mind struggled there. and yet he keeps his job.
I thought it was interesting, actually, if I remember correctly, Kelvin, the way you phrased it was Brown stuck by the club, even though we got.
Yep.
And when you look at it in face value, with however many years later, the fella who got us relegated for the first time, who was in charge when we got relegated for the first time, the next couple of seasons, regardless of anything else, you'd imagine the expectation was, right, we'll go back up, but we're mid-table, lower mid-table.
Yeah.
To me, looking at it again with like modern day football glasses on, it's quite kind of surprising that he lasted. So I don't think he would have in 2020, would he? He wouldn't have lasted.
Absolutely not. He wouldn't have been given the time to do what he did. I think it was different days, and I think maybe we can only guess at the state that the club was in behind the scenes. There was a lot of rancor going on. There was appeals, legal appeals. I know we've talked about Bob Murray's difficulties with that and the problems of getting things done when he was mired in all the legal stuff. But there was a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, which in an odd sort of way might have given him a little bit of breathing space to keep cracking on with his plan. I mean, he's through all the difficulties, he batters on with his plan of developing the youth side of the game, bringing in keen young players. He just keeps driving at that and driving at that. And Ferguson is right from stepping through the door. He's had it with his network and what have you, and recreates the Burnley model, if you want. In an odd sort of way, you look at what he was doing, and give or take a frill or two, it's not unlike what's just happened in the last 5-6 years here, except it's him that's driving at it. He hasn't got a huge body of folk around him, and he's got this background within the board and the directors and the media, especially at the time, absolutely mired in all the legal stuff. It really did. It was in danger of stagnating the club, and it really did take a strong character to stay on track and to stay on plan. I think he sold that plan to the board as it was when he came in. I think they felt that it was a bit of a coup getting him. He was a highly sought after coach and manager. His influence not just on the playing side, but the building of that training academy at Burnley. I mean, it was just his influence ran throughout the whole of the club and all the aspects of the club. But he came in at a time where probably he had room to do that, is my thinking on that. I don't know that for sure, but from what I've read and from talking to older folks that were around at the time, I think he's seen a bit of a gap and got in there and really created a space for himself. But it was a hard start. I mean, you're not wrong about that. Relegation followed by 15th and struggling in 58-59, 16th in 59-60. There were no incomings. He didn't buy any players. He didn't have money to buy players. It was just young players coming through that were playing. And then it starts to sort of turn a bit, 60, 61. They get this, they're sixth. It's the on the field's better. There's a great cup run with they beat Arsenal, they beat Liverpool. They have that fantastic game against Spurs at Roker Park that we always see and hear about, where the place is full and place is rocking, and Danny Blanchflower's saying he's never heard a noise like it before in his life, And I think that's the start of things turning. He comes into 61, 62. He buys Clough, and Jimmy Montgomery comes through as well. I mean, I will rattle through some of the players that come through at that time, but Clough is bought for 42,000, 48,000, or 52,000, whichever figure you believe, and things start to change on the pit. George Hurd comes in, and he's a good signing for the club as well. So they get sixth in 60, 61, 61, 62, that third. It's much better. There's a lot of fans coming through the door if you look at the gates. And then in 62, 63, that third again on points difference with Chelsea. I think we spoke about that game a while back, didn't we? But Clough gets injured, and that's seen as a pretty key moment, I think, in terms of when they actually managed to get up. Because with Clough's injury, people like Nick Sharkey step in, and he was a good player. Nick Sharkey, he came through our youth system. He was a very, very good player, Nick Sharkey, by all accounts. And they try another lad called Andy Kerr. They spend money and buy him. He's a top goal scorer in Scotland. He comes down. He's an honest pro, but it doesn't work for him. And it takes till 63, 64. Clough by this point's off the scene, and we finish. Well, obviously we go up. We finish second. We're second to Leeds, and one of the key things, if you look at that season, one of the things he manages to get is he's got his first team. He knows who he wants to play in that first team. And I think they used only 17 players that season, and 11 of them played 30 games or more that season. And if you speak to people of that era, even young lads like me, we've been tutored and had to listen to supporters rhyming off that team. They would shout that team at you the way I used to shout about the 1973 Cup final team. Everybody knew who that team were. And in that season, we had another good cup run. It's interesting the amount of times. Sometimes people say you can play too many games. You don't want the distraction of the cup. The cup runs seemed to work for Sunderland at this time. They really got the crowd going. Crowds used to roll in for FA Cup ties, and we have a great run against. We beat Everton, and a 3-game epic against Man United, which was by all accounts really fantastic games, all of them, until we get hammered 5-0.
Just quickly, Kelvin, because it's amazing. Again, Martin O'Neill's mentioned this in the past, but from the second tier, it's incredible how many fans this club got from outside of Sunderland because of the likes of Charlie Hurley, Johnny Crossan, and that actually, in these big high-profile games as well. I think it seemed like people knew we were a good side, even though we were a second division side at the time.
Well, one of the things to remember, a lot of people remember Brown as being into youth, but I mean, he bought some really, really good players at the time. Hurley being his first. Peter Wakeham was a goalkeeper of high renown. He scouted him and bought him in, and then sold him on for just in 1962, I think it was, when he realised that he had the answer in Montgomery. He bought Don Kitchenbrand came in and did a good enough job. You'd probably say he was a second division centre forward, but 53 games and 28 goals is not a bad return. Jackie Overfield was another player that the Worthies on the bus used to speak about him. I mean, what a cracking winger he was, a really, really good player. 74 games, 5 goals, but he was a provider and was really considered to be very, very good for the number of years that he played. All of them in the second division. And then George Hurd, Brian Clough, George Mulhall, Johnny Crossan. What a player he was that they brought in. Johnny Crossan, 99 games, 48 goals, and sold him on for 10 grand. Good money at the time to Man City. There are a couple of others probably less well known. Harry Hood, Harry Hooper, Ambrose Fogarty. Amby Fogarty was a player of high renown. Charlie Hurley always really liked him. There was an Irish connection. He was an Irish international, but he was a good goal scorer. 174 games, 44 goals. And he was a lad that could play anywhere on the forward line. He was a very flexible player. So it wasn't just about young players with young players who'd been scouted and come up through the system. He and his scouting team could really nail a good buy, a good player, And those lads were, George Mulhall, Johnny Crossan, George Hurd, fantastic servants to the club. Brian Clough would have been a great servant to the club if he hadn't got injured. Ambrose Fogarty was as well. He was a good player and played a lot of games for us. So the scouting system worked at both ends of the continuum, if you want. And I think the other thing there was, by this point, he's starting to get, there's a bit of cash coming back in. Now that might be the fans, the gates, the money's coming. He's getting some of that money. He's obviously as well, Brown, powerful enough to be able to nail some of that money and get some decent players in to augment the youth that are coming through. So the 63-64 season, it had been probably 3 years in the coming. There was a 6th place finish, 3rd place, and then the Chelsea 3rd place finish on points difference, which a lot of fans, the old worthies on the bus will talk about how gutted they were when that happened. It just wasn't something they expected to win, expected to go up in 62, 63. And Chelsea came and did a number on them. So 63, 64, up the go. There's great photographs of Hurley being carried round the pitch and arms aloft, and fans, the Roker end going bonkers, and it's just a long-awaited promotion. And up the team go, and you think, wow, looking at it historically, you think we're just going to go from strength to strength. We've got these young lads coming through, some great young players coming through, and you're thinking these lads are going to be around for a long, long time, the likes of Ashurst, Irwin, Martin Harvey coming into it, Nick Sharkey, Ian Lowther, at one point, was a cracking goal scorer for us. His goals to game ratio was really, really good. But when I think it's when Clough comes in, Lowther gets sold as possibly they have to keep a bit of money coming in from sales. The regard law there is maybe's disposable in terms of cash. So they've got these young players that they're bringing in, but some of them are being sold to augment what then comes in. So that seems to be the model. A lot of good young players. Dickie Rook, Willie McPeat was a fine player. John Dillon, loads and loads of
Kelvin,
good young lads.
I tell you what, Kelvin, Willie McPeat is a name you need to say in a Scottish accent, really. It can't be said in any other accent. But just great as you're going through those players. He's a question for throughout all that, because we're missing out on promotion and all of that.
Yeah.
But he's building us back up. Are the fans always behind him, do you reckon? Always. I think
the first couple of years were difficult, and part of that I'm feeding in anecdotally there. A couple of the old boys, as I say, I chat to one or two other people over the years, and it was a tough first couple of years. But Alan Brown, he had this. He was whatever the rights and wrongs of Alan Brown. He was a strong, upright kind of character. He wasn't going to be knocked off by somebody booing him, somebody giving him pelters. He just, I know what I'm doing. This is what we're doing. We'll all march forward together. You can come if you want. I think that's a famous Clough quote, isn't it? Didn't he once say, it's time you need to decide what you're doing. Get on this train because it's going to be leaving the station. You're going to be left on the platform if you don't jump on, So Brown seems to have been a bit like that, a bit forthright, and this is what we're doing. So it was the first couple of years weren't easy, but I think one of the things from speaking to anecdotally here, speaking to people that were around at the time, bringing the young lads in. So always, if you're struggling, it's easy to shout at a player that you bought. At the time, I think there was a lot of support for all the young boys that were coming in. They like to see a young player coming in and making a mark, coming in and playing well. Arguably, Stan Anderson's point about possibly there were just too many of them in those early years, and not enough experience. But obviously, the longer that goes on, the more experience some of these lads are garnering, So Ashurst, McNabb and Derwin, they get their debuts in 1958. So by the time the likes of, say, Willie McPeat comes in 1960, they've already done 2 years, 2 seasons, and you could say, well, that's experience of sorts. So I think that he's known for the youth and the youth development in that period, and Charlie Ferguson plays a big part in that. I was going to say I looked at sort of for both periods that he had with the club. I looked at the best 11 from the youth team, and the 11 for that period, 57 to 64, that came through the youth ranks were Monty, Irwin, Dave Elliott, Jim McNabb, Lenny Ashurst, Usher, Sharkey, Martin Harvey, Willie McPeat, and Ian Lowther, and a lad called Goodchild, who Ralphie Goodchild, who he was a youngster already at the club, I think, when Brown came, but they picked him up and bought him in and got the best out of him, And that lad, he's an interesting lad actually, Goodchild, because he played 57 games. Played 45 games from 1957 to 61 and scored 21 goals. And he wasn't a centre forward. He kind of played on the left wing, but like an odd few players, apparently he had a little bit of a fallout with Brown, and that was him. He was done. He was sold to Brighton. And that seemed to be the way it could go with you. That was the downside of Brown. You could, if you fell out with him, it could be a hard road back.
Well, I think when you read everything about Alan Brown, that was his sort of style, and I think Brian Clough seemed to take a lot of cues from his sort of managerial career and his approach to dealing with people from Brown, didn't he?
Yeah. He was Clough was heavily influenced by Brown in his own management career. He wasn't the only one, though. There were others with Sunderland connections. If I tell you that Howard Wilkinson and Laurie McMenemy were heavily influenced by Brown as well from that Sheffield Wednesday connection. I think that was apparently, I hadn't realised that until I started.
The least said about those two, the better, I think, from Sunderland perspective. But a lot of the things that you've talked about there, Kelvin, I think very much of the time, weren't in terms of the club sticking with Brown after relegation and also after not immediately going back up. It was a long time that we spent down there, having never been down there before. But even with the players that you've described coming through, if that was to happen today, one good season, they've been touted for Premier League moves, the bigger clubs are coming in, or bigger teams coming in, nabbing them, and they're going to be itching to get away. But it almost seemed to be when you kind of read, and obviously where all of us kind of reading back on this and trying to imagine what it was all like. But there seems to be a real sort of concerted effort to get the club back up into the top flight. Brown seems to be very focused on that, and building long term. The board seem to be, the players all seem to be. So of course we get promoted, and then Alan Brown leaves to go to Sheffield Wednesday. I think it was something about as a clubhouse or something, wasn't it? That
that is the only thing, Martin, that I've been able to find about that, because it did seem to be an odd. It looks odd, doesn't it?
It does.
He's been there. He's worked through all these hard times. And then they get up into the first division and he resigns. And as best as we can tell, the only thing that regularly turns up is this issue about the club house that he was living in, and he wanted to buy it. And somebody at the club said he couldn't do that.
Mr.
And
Smith.
off he goes. It possibly was, but that's given away who Mr. Smith is, and we said we weren't going to do that, so we don't know who it is. It's like definitely an odd one.
It's like I'm Spartacus, isn't
it? It's so odd, and seems as well to be a little bit alien to his nature. I mean, he's contemptuous of illegal payments, but he's fallen out with the club about buying this house. You could say to me, that looks a little bit double standards, but I don't know all the I don't know all the detail. It just looks really odd.
No, it doesn't kind of align with everything else that he did. Andrew, do you know any other bits of information about that?
I'm afraid not, because it does seem kind of out of kilter, but we don't know what promises or what suggestions had been made to Brown. He might have had a very genuine gripe that he has gone through all of the dirty work. He has cleaned the club up. He's suffered the reputational impact from being in charge of a team that went down. So he might have very well had some sort of indication that he was going to be allowed to buy the house, and then that fell through. But it is a story such as yourself, Kelvin. I would love to have a bit more knowledge on, because it doesn't quite add up. You would think a manager who's just got the club promoted and has got them back on an even keel would be ultra popular with the board, and they'd be happy for him to be setting down roots.
I think there's an interesting thing about Brown. I think I can't remember which player it was that said this, that that he was universally respected, even feared, but not necessarily liked.
Yeah.
Because of the kind of character that he was, and it's always looked odd that, it seems the one thing that I do think happens, which is an unfortunate sort of occurrence, is that Sheffield Wednesday's former club, are mired in a betting on games scandal, and he's obviously been there. He's held in high esteem at Sheffield, and I don't know whether that job then becomes available, and he thinks, "Nah, I'm not having this. I'm just going to go back there, and I'll start again at a place that I've been before, and I'll do the business there."
You've got to remember, we've just come up as well. And if you look at Sheffield Wednesday at the time, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the 5 seasons before that, they finished in the top 6 in Division 1. So it's a big step up.
Well, Disney, he went on to win the FA Cup, didn't he? I think they beat Everton.
They got beat off Everton.
They got beat off Everton. Sorry,
they got beat. They were winning 2-0 and got beat 3-2.
I missed the end of the game.
Yeah.
I think the fact that it took Sunderland so long to replace him the following season tells you a lot about the situation. The board weren't expecting him to go. Put it that way.
Correct. Yeah. That definitely that would be the conclusion that you would come to, is they were totally not expecting to have to be replacing a manager, and it means they get off to a not so good start, and then they do eventually. George Hardwick's given the job, but I believe that they've spoken to a number of people in that time, and I think it was still seen as a very difficult job for people to come in and do, and the expectation is immense in terms of fan pressure to make a good fist of it. So Hardwick does come in and take it on, and off he goes, Brownie, and he does a good job at Sheffield. I mean, I think they finished 8th, and he gets them to the cup final, and he starts sort of working on their youth system. And if you follow Sheffield Wednesday, if you look at their history a bit and listen to their notice boards and what have you, you've still got fans that'll say he did a good job with them when he was there, sorted them out a bit, got the club back on a little bit of a straight and narrow. I mean, I think they were relegated a couple of seasons later, but I'm sure that was after he'd left, by that point. It's a hell of a ride for the time that he's there, 57 to 64. It's not all straightforward, but there's a lot of things happen, which, the youth development, Charlie Ferguson, that scouting system that covered the network, the whole of the country at one point, and players coming in from lots and lots of different places, but especially Scotland, and managing to plug a hole in the northeast of England. And I can remember at this time being a laddie that was playing a bit of football and playing for teams, that there was quite often Burnley and Ipswich were the two teams that you'd often have their scouts at games and stuff, right about the mid-60s.
Both had very strong reputations for getting kids from the northeast, didn't they?
Getting them and spitting them out the other end as well. I had a number of, I always wanted to be, but I was never good enough. But I did have a couple of pals that went away and were spat back out the other end, played with and distracted a little bit, and then, given a sense of what might happen, but then, out the other end, and they've wasted the ones that were chewed up by it. Sort of they weren't at home revising for their O levels, if you know what I mean. They were out on the streets kicking the ball around.
Yeah.
So it's a he sets in place a lot of good things. The Charlie Ferguson connection definitely sort of resurrecting the club, but then some of that's undone by the way that he leaves, and leaves the club. And when you look at Hardwick comes in and eventually does all right. Hardwick's talking about having Brian Clough as his backup, as his number 2, but doesn't then get offered the job.
Yeah.
And then you look at and I mean, it's an unqualified disaster. Ian McCall, whatever. I never find anybody that's got much good to say about Ian McCall looking back on it.
Yeah.
At the time, I think Jim Baxter gave him a little bit of room to manoeuvre when he brought Baxter in, but it was a disaster for the club. That, and then of course he comes back, and McCall's sacked. I believe that they'd spoken to him about the job, and he comes back and starts. Ferguson's still there, and he starts the whole process again. Well, it's never really stopped the youth development. He doesn't have a lot of money to spend, though. In the 4 years that he's back from 68 to 72, he only buys 3 players. He's only able to buy 3 players, and that's Dick Malone, Dave Watson, 2 quality lads, and Joe Baker, who doesn't quite work out. And in the meantime, he has to sell 2 of his very, very best youth players, and I think this is the balance, isn't it? We've talked about it recently with the model that we've got at the moment, that we don't want our very best players being sold. We're okay about some of our goodish ones being sold for good money, but we don't want to lose our best ones. And Colin Suggett and Colin Todd being sold was that's one of my what ifs.
Yeah.
Supposing he'd had the money, supposing the club was financially stable enough to not have to sell them to and buy David Watson and Dick Malone.
Yeah.
What might have happened? And one of the things I will throw in there, supposing they'd had enough money and been stable enough to be able to provide allegedly an additional £5,000 for a player that Ferguson had scouted, passed on to Alan Brown, and Alan Brown went to the board, Kevin Keegan. Okay, and they wouldn't stump up. Apparently, it was an extra £5,000 that was required.
Yeah, right.
And the board couldn't find that. And Keegan went on to Liverpool, and you know what happened there, as well as on to Newcastle afterwards. Would any of that happened if he'd come to us first? That's a real what if, isn't it?
That's one of those Back to the Future moments where you get the DeLorean out and you just go back and change that and alter everything, don't you? Which it would be nice to do on occasion, but
I will say about Brown, there's a lot of conflicting stories about him. He's got this hard edge, he's upright, he's difficult, you don't argue with him. Ian Porterfield, the season we're relegated, we're crying out for some creativity. And I mean, I'm watching us home and away by this point. We're crying out for some creativity. And he's had this pre-season fallout with Porter, and Porterfield never plays the whole season. And Joe Baker, doesn't get a hell of a lot of balls played up to him or anything, and it's part of the reason why Baker wasn't a particular success, because he goes back north of the border, Baker, and scores loads of goals for Hibs and what have you. So he's got that edge to him, but there's all these other, you get these other sort of the counter to that. I remember Chico Hamilton, telling us a story about when he made his full first team debut. Brown had arranged for his parents to come down and Chico didn't know anything about that. And he'd met them, he'd seen them to their seats, he'd looked after them, and when it was time to move on, when the game had finished, Chico had a quick gathering with his parents, and then Alan Brown, I mean, we're talking pre-sat-nav era here, Alan Brown drove his car out of Sunderland and onto the A1, saw his parents back onto the A1, and he just had that. There's this often sort of conflicting kind of stories about him, that he had these moments of real kindness in him, and then this, you don't. My word is law, my fist is iron, a real. Did a lot of good things, and took the club through a terribly difficult time. But then I was watching that season that we were relegated. It was really, really hard, and it didn't look like it was going to get any better, despite the players that we had. But the fact is, 8 of that cup final team were Alan Brown, Charlie Ferguson youths that had come through our system. So he definitely gave the club something and left the club with something. And
I think you're dead right in that he's quite a conflicting character, because he is a manager who's relegated Sunderland twice and yet isn't seen in a negative way because of the context of the 2 jobs he did, and particularly the way that he brought youth through. Just to kind of back up your point there about him as a person, Kelvin, I recently saw a programme from when we played Man City in that relegation season, in the 69-70 relegation season. And there was a little piece in there that Calvin Palmer, who was somebody Brown often fell out with, Calvin Palmer and Brown had been approached by a supporter and accepted the offer to become godfathers for this supporter's newborn baby. So that again just is a little touch of, like you say, that kindness and that softer side to him that maybe isn't as well remembered as some of the more disciplinarian parts of his personality.
I think as well, he didn't, Bobby Kerr, I think it is, that tells the story. Bobby Kerr, one of the things he says about Brown is he's never worn jeans because Brown didn't like them.
Yeah.
But he tells a good story about when he was rehabbing from one of his broken legs, and he was walking about by this point, and Brown meets him, talks to him about how he's getting on, and says to him, they were building the police centre at the time, and I think he says to him, you can go over there and give them a hand with that, which he used to do. Like, the players would end up having to do a shift, and he points Kerr in the direction of a big clump of nettles and says, get them nettles pulled out, and Kerr's like, he just goes and does as he's told, because everybody did what Brown told them to do, goes and does as he's told, and then he looks up after 10 minutes, and there's Alan Brown in another clump of nettles, pulling them up himself. So he's not asking anybody to do anything that he wouldn't do himself, and there's definitely that side to his character. But it was a word of iron. I think he was he ruled with an iron fist. I think
he was instrumental, Kelvin. Kelvin. He was instrumental in the construction of that training centre at Washington. I think he was very hands-on in the design of it, and like you say, the actual physical construction. He was ahead of his time in recognising how important good facilities were. He dictated the type of gymnasium that was there. He was involved in the size and the dimensions of the structure. He was, training back then was often very ad hoc, but he saw the importance of getting those things right behind the scenes, and again, it kind of fed into this attitude of bringing youth through and not just spending big to bring in players and hoping it would all fall into place. Quite a influential character on not just Sunderland but other managers, I think.
No, I think that's right. On
yeah.
football in general and people who went on to manage, wasn't he? But I think we'll, in the interest of time, we'll park Alan Brown for the time being, and we'll move on. 31st of July in 2022. By my reckoning, this is our earliest ever competitive game. When we played Coventry after coming back up from League One, we played Coventry at home. Jack Clark scored for us. I think Jokeres equalised for Coventry, didn't he? Looking back through, I reckon that's our earliest ever competitive first team game, because you don't get many played in July. If anybody can find out, because the World Cup was in was in December, wasn't it? Which is why the season started earlier. So if anybody knows of an earlier proper game, let us know. August 1st, 1996, Phil Gray became the first Sunderland player to move on a Bosman free. Obviously, the Jean-Luc Bosman ruling had come into football not too long before that, which enabled footballers to move for free when they were out of contract. Previously, when a player's contract ended, the club still held the registration, and the registration still had to be purchased, often via a tribunal-decided fee. But Phil Gray was the first Sunderland player to leave under a Bosman. Leaving
I never knew that.
Yeah, there you go. They can join Nancy in France. 2007, we beat Galway 4-0 in the pre-season friendly. Michael Chopra and Kieran Richardson scored their first goals for the club. And 2 years later, Kieran Richardson was also on the score sheet along with Kenwyn Jones, as Steve Bruce's Sunderland beat Tony Mowbray's Celtic in a friendly game up at Parkhead 2-1. There were 2 future Sunderland players in the Celtic lineup. Can you name either or both of them?
Ooh, Liam Miller?
No.
What was the year there, Martin? Sorry.
2009.
2009. Oh, I know dead air is a crime, Martin, but I can't think.
Well, I will. Both of them played in League One for us. Aidan McGeady also played in the Championship for us for a season. So McGeady came off the bench. The other one, I'd have bought you a pint if you'd got that. Glenn Louvens, whose career at Sunderland is rather forgettable. But there you go. August 2nd, 1985, Seamus McDonough signed on loan from Notts County. Now, McDonough was famous for disputing the size of the goalposts, I think, at Blundell Park, wasn't he? One crossbar was higher than the other or something like that. But he came back to Sunderland as part of Martin O'Neill's coaching staff as goalkeeper coach. And I think a lot of people say very good things about him as a goalie coach.
Yeah.
1991, John Cornforth, who was a Northeast-born midfielder player who'd come through the youth team ranks, but never really established himself in the first team. He left to join Swansea, but he ended up being a Welsh international and doing quite well for Swansea over a period of time. Now, here's another question for you. 2005, we signed Anthony Litalik from Liverpool for a season, and at that point, well, after that season, I think he scored 5 goals in all competitions for us. I thought he was bloody awful, but that's a matter of opinion. But he'd scored 5 goals for us that season, making him the most prolific goal-scoring loan player at the time. Now, obviously, before that, like season-long loans weren't very common, were they? They were normally a month or 3 months. They weren't season-long loans.
Yeah, yeah.
By my reckoning, since then, so we're talking 20 years, but since then we've had 7 loan players who've surpassed that. Do you want to have a few names?
Barini was one.
Barini got 7. Yeah, he got 7 in 2013-14.
Just before we pick any more players for that, Martin, you said it was a matter of opinion whether Litalik was not very good. I'm happy to say it was a matter of fact that he wasn't very good. You know, if you need me to take that one, I'm willing to just stand up and say that. And Barini came from Liverpool as well, and 2 very different loanees from.
He was He was class, Barini, wasn't he?
Well, he was when he was on
Good
loan,
for us.
definitely.
Yeah.
Cisse?
What about
Yeah.
Cisse?
Cisse is another
Yeah.
one. Yeah, he got 10 goals in
Yeah.
08-09.
what about
Ooh.
Bentner? When did he come?
Nicholas Bentner, 8 goals, 2011, 2012.
Well, Danny
Ooh.
Welbeck?
No, he didn't score that many. I think he
Did
might
he
have-
not?
No, he's surprisingly few.
Interesting.
But he might have. To be fair, let me have a look. He might have got 6 from memory, which would give him it would place him on a list of people who've done better than Natalik. But
That's a long list. A list of players
yeah.
who did better than Natalik is a long, long list.
Any more names?
I'm struggling now.
I like it though. It's a good teaser. This one.
The other,
Yeah.
you've actually got the 3 that are in the greatest past, if you like. So there's 4 more that are more recent.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Ahmad? How many did Ahmad score for us?
14.
Oh wow!
Whoosh.
Okay, yeah.
That makes him the best loan signing in terms of goal scoring that we've had.
Nice. Ooh.
So
I'm
put
just
you out of
trying
misery.
to. Yeah, go on.
Aye.
Go on.
So there was one in our relegation from the championship season under Simon Grace and Chris Coleman. Lewis Graben.
Yeah.
Who got 12. I still think if he'd stayed, we'd probably stay up. Even though he might not have deserved it. Same season as Ahmad, there was another one who got 7. Only played half a season.
Ooh. No. Not
Ellis
coming to
Sims.
mind.
Ellis Sims.
Yeah,
Everton recalled him, didn't they, when after we had sort of got to the end of the calendar year. And there was one last season which it might be a little bit sneaky to get in, but I'm claiming it because we made his move permanent halfway through the season after he'd scored a lot of goals, which is obviously Wilson Isidore.
Yes.
So he ended up with 30, and I reckon 10 of those must have been technically as a loan player. So it's an interesting little aside. But
Well, hey.
Things have certainly improved since Anthony Natalik. Thank goodness. August the 3rd. Let's have a look at some of the things that have happened then. 1929. A chap called Bert Johnson signed from Alva Albion Rangers. He went on to be part of the 1937 FA Cup winning side. In 1950, Jack Headley, a fullback, signed from Everton for 10 grand. And I think when you look back, he was quite a key part in the Alan Brown sides that we talked about. He featured in those. 1974, we beat the Mags 2-1 at Roker Park. And interesting, it was a Texaco Cup tie. Bobby Kerr made his debut for Sunderland in that game against Newcastle. And on the same day, Michael Gray was born. So that was...
there was a canny crowd at that game as well, wasn't there?
28,700. Yeah, 28,738 from memory. So that's a good crowd for you were the one that made it, Kelvin. And
I was.
In 2001, Bernd Haas signed from Grasshopper Zurich for 750 grand. Now, we are recording this on Thursday before we play Hearts on Saturday. So by the time you listen to this, you will know how that game panned out for Craig Gordon's testimonial. But on August 1st in 1981, we had a pre-season friendly up at Tynecastle. And I was a first appearance, Andrew, for quite a controversial thing in Sunderland's history.
Yes, you're dead right. I think that's putting it mildly. The match itself was the first game of pre-season. We'd just survived relegation the year before with a famous win at Liverpool. So yeah, it was a new season we were preparing for now. The game wasn't too good by all accounts. We scored quite a scruffy goal after an hour, and that was the only goal of the game. From the reports, Gary Rowles put a ball through, Alan Brown's tried to chase onto it, but the keepers got there first, only to absolutely whack it off Alan Brown, and then the ball's just rolled along painfully in slow motion into the empty net. And from what I gather, that was pretty typical of the game itself. It was a poor match. Ian Munro, Kelvin, who you'd mentioned earlier, and you gave us a nice little sing-song. I don't know if you want to do an encore now, or if you're not ready. But he came on. He played. He'd only just signed for us. He'd been brought in by Alan Durban, who was our new manager, newly appointed manager. He bought Munro. I think after this game, he felt as if he wanted to bring in more new signings. He wasn't too encouraged by what he'd seen. But not only was it Durban's first game in charge, as Martin says, there was another first up in Edinburgh, and making its debut was our infamous candy stripe kits, which I'm sure most people listening in will now be muttering under their breath because it was not too popular. The kit had only been officially unveiled the day before. Now, I don't know if you remember, Kelvin, but the photo shoot at Roker Park featured Jeff Clark. Now, he was wearing the blue change kit, which was actually quite well received. He'd only just come back from that horrible injury at the end of not the season gone, but the one before. You know, when he was injured and he missed the final game in the promotion run-in. I think he was happy to just be back on a pitch, pulling on a football shirt. I don't think he was bothered what the kit looked like. But the home shirt was a massive departure from tradition. It was, as I say, kind of candy stripe, very thin red stripe. The badge was in the middle of the shirt rather than to the side, and the shorts were red. So it did not go down well with traditionalists. And I think something that didn't help it was, whilst Clark was modelling the change kit, it was a local model called Jane Davison who was showcasing this new home shirt. Now, at the time,
do you know her, Kelvin?
No.
Well, at the time, she was Miss Newcastle. So,
Ooh, drop the blooper there, surely.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, Kelvin, you're saying you don't recognise the name, but I actually think later on in the decade, Jane was involved with a name that you will recognise. I believe she was a friend, perhaps was dating a Sunderland director called Barry Beatty. Do you remember that name?
Never. Yeah, of course. Yeah,
but Barry Beatty was quite a well-known director, and he courted a lot of
Murray's
press.
pal, yeah.
Well, yes, yeah. He courted a lot of press later on in the decade. So yeah, Jane Davison's an interesting name and had a couple of bits of involvement with the club back then.
There's a great photograph of that. I've actually got this photograph on I think it's the Sunderland's annual for the Christmas annual that they used to put out. And Jeff Clark sitting in the middle of I thought it was, my memory tells me it was two but just one. It's, my memory's defunct. It's just one very bunny lassie. But there was no wrong with the blue strip.
No, the blue strip was popular. Le Coq Sportif also brought out a third kit that wasn't seen very often. I think that was quite well received as well. That was mainly red with very small white pins.
Oh yeah.
So
I remember that. Yeah.
As I say, it was unpopular. Now Durban is a new manager. He's only just at the club. He's trying to get off to a good start. and then suddenly there's this furore around the new kits. This tells me a lot. He was keen to point out immediately that the kit had been agreed, the design had been signed off before he was there. And his word was he was apparently aghast when he first saw this shirt. Now, a manager now saying that about a new kit would be getting pulled in for a little word off the commercial team, I think.
You can see how he got along well with Tom Cowie, yeah.
Well, yeah. I think he realised, having said that he was aghast, he then quickly reeled back and started going into a bit of a PR mode and said, "Oh, but at least it's still red and white. We've still retained our traditional colours." And then he pointed out, and this probably did ingratiate himself with Cowie, he pointed out that the success of the shirt would dictate whether he's going to be able to sign more players. So I think he's probably, at first said, "Oh yeah, this kit's got nothing to do with me," and then his head's gone, "Hang on, I'm going to drop myself right in here. I'll just pull back a bit." But I mean, from the start, there was bad feeling towards this kit. The Journal had described it as controversial before it had even been unveiled. So, people hadn't even seen what it looked like, and the Journal were already saying, we're kind of laying the groundwork for this unhappiness. When it was released, so then this is on the morning of the Hearts game, they do an article entitled, "It's the Thin Red Line," and again, it's touching upon the disappointment about the design. Durbin's further quoted as saying at this point, now I don't know if he's had a quiet word in his ear off somebody, "If we are winning, then I don't think the fans will have any axes to grind. If we can produce a winning side, then everyone should be happy. The actual quality of the shirts is top quality. You never know. Spurs won the cup in their first year with the Coq Sportif shirts." So it's a bit of a reach. I think he's desperately trying to claw back a bit of goodwill. Within hours, the London branch of the Supporters Association are very vocal. They're not happy with this change and the loss of the traditional red and white shirts. The Sunday Sun, the following day, in their write-up of the Hearts game, they had a journalist called Paul Chester. Now, he described the shirt as, quote, "with it." Now, with what, I don't quite know.
What is the question,
yeah. The fans weren't too happy. And by the 5th of August, when we played Berwick in a pre-season friendly, now because Berwick is a lot closer to home than Edinburgh, there's a big, well, yes, Kelvin knows that with his geography. There's a big contingent of Sunderland fans at the Berwick game, and apparently they're chanting about the shirt and how they dislike it, Kelvin.
Well, I don't recall that because, I was at that game against Berwick, but like Chris, I spent a good whack of the afternoon in the pub with some friends that I used to work at the pit with. So from up there, so I recall very little of that game actually, other than a good day out. But there was a good turnout for that game. It's just up the road, but that strip was interesting, wasn't it? Because I'm one of probably quite a few people that I'm not that bothered about the fashion, of it. I'm not that bothered as long as it's, and I can remember before I saw it saying, "It's just bloody red and white stripes, man. And then when I saw it, I thought, that's not red and white stripes. I was quite like, bloody hell, that's not a Sunderland strip, man, So I was one of the people that was pretty scathing about it, really having in the past been totally not interested at all in anything like that,
The reaction to it, Kelvin, was pretty extreme, and it did have an impact because originally it was going to be here for 3 years, that kit. And the club actually got rid of it after only 2 because it was so unpopular. And the weirdest thing about it is nowadays, I think it's fair to say it's a bit of a cult classic.
Yeah.
You'll often see fans wearing it. Now, that might be some cold comfort to the Coq Sportif because they were not very popular at the time. I've got an interesting quote here. When the shirt was launched, when Sunderland first started wearing it, the marketing manager in England for Le Coq Sportif was an Olympic silver medalist. He was a sprinter called Robbie Brightwell. I don't know if you know that name. He married Anne Packer and was father to Ian and David
Brightwell. Yeah.
Well, Ian and David Brightwell. And Ian had his testimonial against us in 1998. I'm just trying to think what kit we would have worn in that. It certainly wouldn't have been as unpopular as this candy stripe one. But his quote at the time was, the idea is to make it a fashionable piece of clothing as well as a football shirt. It will be worn casually and so increase the sales. With the old shirt, that could never be done. So we're coming to a time when football shirts are now not just a perfunctory piece of kit. They're a source of income. And this just tells you everything. In the press, they had to actually point out that shirts, which retailed at about £9 for adults, for every shirt sold on the high street, the club would get money for it. The press actually had to write that. Obviously, there's a lot of people thinking, well, I don't care because I'm not buying it because it looks a clip. But this just shows how naive football was to commercialism at that point, that it's having to be pointed out that shirts can be a source of income. It's just unfortunate for the club that this shirt wasn't a source of income because not many people liked it at the time.
Had shirts really been sold to any great extent before that to supporters? I think my sense of this is it's kind of almost at the early stages of football shirts being available to purchase. And then, a couple of years later, you start probably at the same time, you start getting sponsors on shirts and all that sort of stuff as well, don't you?
I don't think adults wore them at that point. I think you could get kids' sizes, but they'd perhaps be just almost a generic red and white shirt. They wouldn't be an official product. And Le Coq Sportif were one of the first to come into the market and start selling replica versions.
And I think still at the game, you know how these days you go to the game and if it's a sunny day, especially at the Stadium of Light, it's like an optical illusion sometimes, all the red and white stripe, the shirts that people are wearing. But at that time, you're right, Martin, it wasn't the fashion to stick the strip on and go at the game. Some of us were still flapping around in silk scarves and woolen scarves and what have you, depending on the weather. And maybe it's the odd T-shirt or two, but not necessarily football strips, and not adults either, as Andrew says. It was it was an unpopular shirt, and having been totally disinterested, when I saw it, I could see why.
I tell you what's interesting as well. Sorry, Andrew, but recently when I was on my jaunts around the place, we went over to Barcelona and went to the Barcelona Museum. Now you think Barcelona, in my mind, it's blue and red stripes, and the very early, for the vast majority of the early days of Barcelona, their strips were very religiously stripes, similar sort of size stripes to what we'd kind of assume Sunderland stripes are. in recent years, they've gone nuts with the kits. They've had all sorts of different variations of stuff. And, obviously we're not close to gauging the Barcelona sort of fan base's reaction to stuff, but you kind of wonder how they responded to stuff like that and how the manufacturers kind of go about with that, whether it's an English cultural thing or, whatever it is, because I was kind of taken aback by looking at some of the Barcelona kits going, you'd never get away with that if you tried to do that as a Sunderland shirt.
Yeah. It's a very dangerous game to play, I think. I think people are quite happy for change kits or third kits or these limited edition ones. I think they're quite happy for shirts to have a bit of something different about them. And maybe this kit that we're talking about would have been loved if that was a change kit.
Well, it would have been a away kit, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but yeah, you're right. It might just be an English tradition thing. But I mean, we've got this official regulator that's now been made into law by the government in the last couple of days. And I believe part of their remit is to stop clubs doing things like changing badges or changing home shirts because it's so important to the identity of a club and what supporters feel towards a club. I mean, red and white stripes is synonymous with Sunderland. And I don't think the club would make such a drastic change these days because they know the fallout would be huge. But yes, you're right. Maybe, I mean, I remember Barcelona, there was a lot of unimpressed fans when they first started putting sponsors on their shirt.
Yeah, that's right.
So, maybe they're not as bothered about the design, but even
commerciality of it, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, even accepting for the design, they still have things that mean a lot to them. And yeah, this kit was I can see why the club wanted to try something different. It was an era of more adventurous designs, and they're obviously trying to make a bit of a splash in the market and get some money for these kits. But just sadly, it was ill-judged. And unlike people desperate to claim credit for Pick and Dance of the Nights and Ready to Go at the Stadium of Light, I don't think I've ever seen a director or designer or anybody put their hand up and say, by the way, lads and lasses, that was my idea.
It's still being talked about 40-odd years later, isn't it? So, there's something in there.
Probably another ancestor of this bloomin' Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith's come along and designed a shirt to just twist the knife and get his own back on the club.
Now, it'll be interesting in 30 years' time if people start rocking up to the ground in that carrier bag shirt, because that was still red and white. The regulator would pass that. That's still red and white stripes, unless they've got specifications about the width of the stripes in government policy, which I very much doubt. But it's there's
it's interesting, isn't it? I got a blue away shirt for my birthday, believe it or not, and my grandkids. I put it on and was messing around with the kids. I come charging down the stairs and running about the place in it. And my kids were looking at it, the grandkids, and they didn't believe that it was a Sunderland strip because it didn't have the sponsor's name on it. And it's clever, isn't it? It's clever, the way that sort of goes. It wasn't until I pointed out the badge that that there was a little bit of belief that it was a Sunderland strip. But why would he get that strip, Papa, if it hasn't got the logo on it? I've lost the name of the. That shows you how much attention I paid, that kind of thing. But the sponsors.
Well, I wanted one of those. I couldn't get one, so I had to get one with the sponsor on. But my lad we were able to get him one without the sponsor on, which looks great without the sponsor on.
I'm not that much into this stuff, but I think that is a nice strip. As was the light blue candy striped one. It was a nice top, that,
Kelvin.
There you go. God, I've never spent so much time talking about fashion.
Never change, Kelvin. I love that idea of you unwrapping your shirt, putting it on, running around the house, pretending you're Eliza Mayender with the grandkids or whatever. I just think that's what football's all about. It's meant to make people like you and me just have a bit of enjoyment and a bit of a daft laugh. That's when football's at its best, when we're having fun around it.
I was pretending to be Granite Jacker, actually, was shouting it. Granite signed, and here comes Granite Jacker. Well, I'm built more like him, you see.
Well,
built like granite. Built like granite.
Rock at the back.
Let's hope by the time this comes out, we have actually signed him. It hasn't fallen through and he's gone to Newcastle or something, but that'll be one for us to wait and see. Keep refreshing the internet when we're doing this podcast to see if he's signed, because it's on the verge of it allegedly, but we will see. Well, I think the vision of Kelvin running around the house with his new shirt on is enough to put a smile on our faces and leave us for the week. So that will wrap things up there. So thank you to Chris. Chris had to duck off to go on with something, so Chris is gone. But Kelvin and Andrew, thank you very much for joining us today. And Andrew, have you got a few clues to tempt people and whet people's appetite for our next podcast?
I tell you what, Martin, very well remembered. Considering this is your first show back, you've
and we're 2.5 hours in.
Yeah, you've done well to remember that. I'd nearly forgot the quiz, to be fair. The next episode is going to be the 4th to the 10th of August, I believe. Now, this player was born in that period. This player's birthday is on the 4th of August. Hugely talented player, and when he was sold, it was very unpopular. Really, the fans were not happy that this lad had been moved on. Like I say, he was very talented. He was from the region, which is often very popular. He did play slightly before my time, gents, but I knew him through his work summarising Sunderland games on the radio. And as a player before that, he'd been a full international and an FA Cup winner. So as I say, it's going to be his birthday during the next episode. So get your thinking caps on and see if you can come up with any answers.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We will look forward to that one. So thank you, everybody, for listening. Remember to keep an eye on the podcast feeds. We've got pods dropping every day for you. And of course, there's tons of stuff on the website for you to enjoy as well at rokerreport.sbnation.com. But until next week, it's goodbye from all of us.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.